So Ryan McCready, thank you very much for coming on the podcast. Welcome to the Awkward Conversations podcast. How you doing?
Good, very well. Grateful for the opportunity and hopefully not too much of an awkward conversation, but I'm fair game, Damien.
Yeah, I know. It's a running joke. The only awkward thing about the conversation is us, so you'll be all right. Like, yeah, I see at this point in the election, you have been extremely present on social media, doing your TikToks, and I've seen you on Twitter, and then in the papers. More recently, there with you taking is it the girl with Down syndrome to a ball? Am I saying that right?
Yeah, Claire from SBS2.
Yeah.
Remarkable.
Yeah, I'd love to delve into that a bit deeper later on. Yeah, so is the social media side of it exhausting? Are you tired at the minute, or how are you feeling?
Yeah, I'm definitely feeling a bit of burnout at this stage. A couple of days to go. It's easier to say no to put yourself out there, podcasts or interviews, or especially anything live. Like I done a radio interview this morning, and it can be controversial, and it's just something you have to step up and continue to do. It's easy to say no at this stage, so you don't, have a mess up or anything controversial.
Have you had any gaffes yet?
Yeah, I probably had a few gaffes in terms of like social media, but them gaffes are normal. That you're allowed to have. It's just a human element. And people like to see that. They want to know you're still human, and they can see behind the scenes. So every 6 weeks or so, we've been releasing like behind the scenes bloopers on TikTok, Facebook, not necessarily too much on Twitter because it can be very serious and it's more politicos and journalists. So the way we do it, Damien, is our message is consistent, but the way we deliver that message will be different on each platform, because you look at the demographics and the analytics on the online stuff. Your message just needs to hit people at the right tone, and we've been trying to learn every stage we've been doing that. So, like for example, TikTok, it's short, it's sweet, it needs to be a bit more than just you talking. You need to have an overlay with the music, the graphics, the text, and that's what people expect. So whenever they're scrolling through, you need to hit them in the first 5 seconds so that they can listen further to your message. Whereas we find Facebook can be a bit more standard stuff. So put out just raw video footage, a few updates on where you are, and people's been responding on the doors going, oh yeah, I knew you were here, I seen your video saying you're in the area. So it gives people a heads up, as opposed where generally people would candidates would do it at the very end of the day saying, I've just been through your estate, I want to thank you very much. I've had a very positive canvas, as they all say. But if you give people that heads up, they're ready for you on the doors, or they're out in the streets saying, where is he? Let's have some action. And so I like that type of engagement with the electorate, voters, or anybody would speak with me.
Yeah, you used to be you're super progressive, which is great, and like very all on top of the social media. And I think you are probably the standout politician doing the social media game like right, so it's really impressive. Obviously, with that very progressive stance, you used to be in the DUP, isn't that right? And then you left after Arlene Foster's treatment. With your progressive kind of outlook, was there any kind of tension between your outlook and kind of some of the DUP stances on things like gay rights or whatever? Was there any sort of stuff where you believed in the party, but you didn't always maybe agree with like some of the historical stuff?
That's a fair synopsis of it, I suppose. Where when we had the early conversations about them looking to get me as a council candidate before I was even a member. For me, I was a unionist in terms of our constitution, and the best way for me to deliver or give something back for the community in a civic duty would have been through politics. So I didn't really look too far and wide. They were the evident unionist group here in Foyle, and there was virtually no presence for us unionists or anybody else of that nature. And so I was open to say, look, I've been around the world twice. I've spoke to people as many times as I can, and I think I'm very moderate. So I wouldn't agree with one of their policy in particular about their position on LGBT and the gay rights and marriage. I said, look, I don't follow that. And without going into too much detail, for them, they said, look, as long as you're not kind of bashing us, we're looking to move forward in time. And I took that as okay, maybe I can drive policy internally, locally in the branch. Evidently, as time went on and I was voting differently than the party normally would in council chamber, and I went out of my way to maybe encourage other members to abstain from votes so it didn't stand in the way of like an LGBT motion coming through the chamber. Some of them did, but then there was a few individuals who were more consistent in their personal positions on it. And so within a year and a half, the more confident I grew in speaking out and speaking up for people, I was almost on my own at some points, with exception to the now mayor, who would be a bit more similar mindset to myself. And then things started to break down in the second year internally. And then it became breaking point where when Edwin Poots, I think, and the treatment of how they managed the exit of Arlene Foster, clearly, she's not without her faults, but the manner in which they dealt with her and her exit, I took issue with. I said, if that's how you treat someone who's been in the party, decades, I'm only a blow-in. Is that the standard? Is that how we treat each other? And then Poots came in, and at that point, behind the scenes, I was already starting to leave the party, and I was very open with them. I didn't do anything behind their back. I left relatively good terms. I was just a bit more apt when it came to media management and getting out my position first, where their reaction was exceptionally slow and lethargic. And yeah, so that was my exit strategy. But I have to be clear, my intent was not to stay in politics. It was probably to leave because I've seen how messed up it is, not just within a party, but overall Northern Ireland. I thought, this is not how I've been brought up in my previous career of how you do business. And largely it was ineffective ineffective in politics, where in the military, everything's about being effective, and meritocracy. So I had a period of a grace period around 6 weeks where I had to either relinquish the seat back to the party, remain as an independent, or select another pro-union party, which would be a platform to do more and reach more people. And then, everything else is evident through the papers, where I was approached by Jeffrey Donaldson when he then retook leadership of the party. And I was in negotiations with Doug Beattie of, if this was the case, then I want more freedom than what I've had in the DUP. I mean, complete latitude of left and right of where I go, with the exception to their maybe stricter policies where it's a party policy. You join the party, you absorb their policies in a way. But like any political party, a lot of their policies are very outdated. Some haven't been touched in 10 years. So, you just apply a bit of common sense to, if you need to change things, you have to do it from inside, not outside. Sometimes, having a commentary on social media on things you want to change just isn't enough. And so, and I had history with Doug Beattie in previous occupations as well in the military. So I knew what I was getting when he took over as leader from the Ulster Unionist Party. I can have a direct conversation of, the subsequent 12 months, which I've just been through now. And here I am, I suppose. That kind of fills that starting out in politics. And, on reflection, people can say there's an element of naivety in politics. They're probably right. Geographically, if I was in Belfast with more options and more engagement with people in politics, and bear in mind, I didn't have the lived experience of 20 years of politics in Northern Ireland, because I was away and abroad and didn't see all the controversy or all the issues, all the shenanigans that went on, and if you could read through all of them over the last 20 years, you probably wouldn't touch any of them. But
it's depressing reading.
It really is.
It's a very it's a very interesting journey for you there, switching parties and stuff. And obviously you've been made to feel very welcome under Doug. Like we had the privilege of interviewing Doug there recently, and he was brilliant to talk to, hugely entertaining, and Doug just says it like, there's no politician in him. There's human in that man, like, and he just says it as it is, which is I think that's his appeal.
Absolutely. That's one of the things I've noticed. So I would say he was a straight shooter, now he's a straight talker in politics. But then within that, there's an element that can be countered from other parties or people, that maybe he can be too straight in the media, or sometimes, so we had issues around how we communicate on our position on anti-protocol rallies. So yes, we get the intent and his position, but communication sometimes can be countered from other parties and be exploited. But that is politics, I suppose. So you can be, a victim of your own candor in politics, which I think is a burden worth holding.
Yeah, and I'm with you on that one. Probably a tiresome burden at the same time, though, because like Bruce, you can say anything, and it can be, like we had, which in fairness to Colin, he knew what he had said was a scoop. Colin Eastwood was on the podcast there recently, and the poor guy, I think he was wrecked just from all the interviews you guys do, and he had the cold, and he was a bit flat, but he was hugely entertaining to listen to, and he just said off the cuff, I asked him about Northern Ireland libel laws, because I remember hearing one time that Sam McBride said that Northern libel laws are very out of date, and some politicians can use it as almost like to top up their bank accounts, because it's quite, the bar is seemingly quite low, and I'm hoping stating the kind of the ways Sam stated, and hopefully I'm not misremembering what he said, but I put that to Colin, and Colin was like, oh yeah, Sinn Féin are wild for that. So they tried to get me to stop talking about something, then I sent them a letter back, and then it became the whole big thing, and now it's on the front page of the Irish News Tonight. So yeah, it's amazing how much like it was 2 sentences in the podcast.
Mm-hmm. No, that's the risk of being in the public light. You speak for more than yourself, and that's part and parcel, I suppose. But if you do, like, we're all human. Everyone gets tired. And your emotions come in. So it's difficult sometimes to be dispassionate when you communicate, even though you're passionate about that subject or topic, because it's people's lives, whether it's cost of living, housing, or anything in between. So yeah, I find that's quite difficult to maintain that. But no, we all slip up, and if it's a scoop, it's a scoop, and the press will do their jobs.
Yeah. And tell me this. So I know you were in Ukraine helping them train not so long ago, and you've been very good to raise awareness and get care packages out there and everything, which I thought was really good. And you were the first off the mark. There was no messing around. And I saw your video where you had the whiteboard and you had the plan all out. This very, very typical military man, it was all written out very, very well orchestrated. So no, it was brilliant. So congratulations on that. It was really, really quite impressive, and a really nice thing you did.
No, I appreciate that, but I was just a point man. It was apolitical. It just so happened that I was a councillor in the area, but we made it clear from the offset that there was no politics, so it was open to any political party or councillor or any elected rep to get involved. And so we deliberately chose a name to kind of have the humanitarian effort framework under FOIL aid. So there was no issues of anything, and that was probably the best call. We had all support from, I say BT48, BT47, but also different political parties were involved. People from Donegal, Buncrana, locals from in around Claudy, Drumahoe. And do you know what? I think after the pandemic, people, it's not that they needed, but they really benefited by an effort to help someone else, to get them out of the house, and they have a sense of purpose again. And I find that on that wee journey because there was so many collection points from schools, religious places, and people's houses, community centres, which is brilliant. And so when I looked at the kind of problem set of, well, we've got all these really good donations coming in, flooding the collection points, and we said, well, hang on, how are these getting into Ukraine? And whenever I kept getting the answer back, oh, so-and-so's taking it. So I kept chasing down of who's actually taking this out. And it was a circular, it was almost circular, but came back to, oh, no, hang on, right, so nobody has actually going to take it from B to C. So A to B is fine. And then that's when I stepped in to look at a logistical problem. And within 72 hours, we had a person identified in the Ukraine side with a Ukrainian charity who demonstrated that they can do it. We had a point of contact who I worked with previously in the military, who is in or was in the Polish border side with the, just so happened he was working with the British embassy in Kiev, but they were in exile in Poland. So he put together the reception for me at the border, paperwork, customs, and just teased out of some of the issues that we just had no experience in. And we just linked in with a local company in Claudy who would actually do the lorries. And then we just had to finance getting each lorry load out. So some businesses stepped in and said, look, I'll give you a tank of gas. And this is like £900 to £1,000 for a tank of gas to get them out, accommodation and paperwork. So that worked. That was the big end. But at the kind of micro level is we outgrew our office within 4 hours of putting up the post. We linked in with the YMCA and said, look, I need to accommodate your hall. And there's no issues. So we would look to, if we were going to displace any activity, we just got in touch with the school and say, you've got a hall, it's not being used. Can you enable, facilitate? Everything's in place in terms of health and safety, risk assessments. Just need a key holder and a caretaker. So the way I approach things is there's no real problems. It's just working through solutions and getting the right people to understand your intent and get buy-in from them. And everyone bought in and just made it happen. So within that 72 hours, we were releasing lorries, being packed, or boxed, or sorted, packed, loaded, identified exactly what it was, messages put on it from everyone who did it, and sent it off. And because it was the first load going out, we had to assure that it did get out. And that's where a local guy who was, it was his company that had the first lorry. Him and I actually flew out into eastern Poland. I met up with my friend Ivan, who put us up on the border. So we were ready to receive the lorry, because it's not as simple as just sending it straight across into Ukraine because of insurance purposes, liability, and it is a conflict war zone. So we got the guys in Kiev to meet us, or to forward mount in Lviv, 15 miles from the border. And when we were ready, we brought them into Ukraine for about 10 miles, and we had an exchange point where this lorry's backed up, back to back, cross-decked across, new people stamped, and away it went. It was like clockwork. So it's,
a bit of military, man. Was there an element of fear at all going across the border, or were you kind of aware where the conflict zones were and roughly?
No, no. So for that point, it was no fear of conflict. It was more of fear of letting people down. That if I would be stuck with 3 lorries which can't make it into Ukraine, I would see that as a failure, because everybody who still under a cost of living, just out of a pandemic, that are running around their houses getting things like sleeping bags or putting money in to help someone else who's worse off than them. That's who I knew there's a lot on the line. But like, I played a connection still in Ukraine, in Poland, so I was very well briefed on what activity was taking place where. So I was at no real risk than what you would if you were on holiday in Krakow, for example.
Sure. Is there a special connection to this conflict? Obviously, when we all see conflicts around the world, we're sad about it, and you know we don't like it. But because you've been over there and training those guys, is there a special affinity you have with that? And have you any thoughts on the conflict in terms of how it's going and that sort of thing?
Yeah, my connection, first of all, is I felt deeply connected with it on my return from service in Ukraine. And so that was right back at 2015 and 2016, just after the Maidan revolution, where people stood up. And then the then outgoing president went into exile in Russia, hence the revolution.
Did you see that documentary? Sorry to cut across you there.
Yeah. I watched the documentary, and I actually managed to follow through the footsteps of the Maidan revolution in the Maidan Square and see where all the spots were and the local stories. It's quite humbling and just breathtaking that happened. And for me, it was, even though it's Eastern Europe, it's a fresh country. It's been out of the Soviet Union for so long, and it's somewhere I would have went on holidays, and I hope to go there with my family when things return normal. But the connection was more so than just the geography. It was when I went in, and the operation I went in under was actually a discrete operation then in 2014, 15, 16. but it was overt thereafter, and it was Operation Orbital. And we had a small team of around 15 people, all civilians, working inside the city centre to coordinate efforts for training. So I designed the training modules, the courses, based on the training needs analysis by visiting the Ukrainian military bases. So they had experiences, and they were already in direct conflict in eastern Ukraine, in the Donbass region, in Donetsk, Luhansk. So they came back and they said, look, we've learned some really catastrophic lessons, which we've paid for in blood. We need help. We're having issues with IEDs, ground sign awareness. We're having issues with, counter sniping, anti-ambush drills. So basic infantry skills. They hadn't had any upgrades since the 1990s. So their doctrine, their military materiel was way outdated to what the Russians were, especially the Russian tactics, which were Russian separatists backed and supported and augmented by Russian Spetsnaz inside Ukraine. So I would analyze the issues they're having and turn that into a training package for, could be 1 week to 3 weeks in different modules. And I would send that back to UK, and they would force generate the right people, the right expertise, bring them out in and send them to the likes of the areas that you're familiar with now, Mykolaiv, Odessa, Cherkasy, Zhytomyr, and we would train them. But not only just do direct training, it's in order to build capacity or resilience, it needs to go further than a training of 50 people, 100 people. It needs to be exponential. And that's where you do a train the trainer. So we would train their trainers in order to disseminate and inculcate that training so it spreads far and wide without us being there all the time. And that's the type of modern operations training support packages what they're doing now, as opposed to going into direct conflict in order to try and offset the direct conflict. And during that time, I mentioned Ivan earlier on, Damien. So he was my translator, interpreter for several months, and we got a close relationship, kept in touch ever since. We done some private work thereafter. And so I had friends in Ukraine, and I made friends with the Ukrainian commanders, short space of time. And it's that type of camaraderie. It didn't really care what flag was on your shoulder. It was, you're both kind of military men, military personnel, and you formed a bond. And so, and I learned the language as well. I spent every morning learning a new sentence until I got to a point 3 months in where I could hold a good, well, I could go around Kiev, dinner, breakfast, business lunch, and not speak English. And in the military frame, I could have a good conversation on the boardroom table of training needs to a point of failure. But then once I failed, I could no longer speak Ukrainian, and Ivan would jump back in, and we tried to carry that on throughout the deployment. So that was the kind of connection I had. And it's small things where the Ukrainian borscht soup, the beetroot-based soup, all that type of thing that you get immersed in. And so fast forward now, we've got an invasion, a complete invasion of Ukraine by Russian forces, which are no longer hiding the fact that they are Russians, backed by the Kremlin. So when I initially seen it, I thought, right, this is different than what has normally been seen in the eastern Ukraine. What had changed? And this is where I try to analyze the geopolitical impacts. And there was a couple of ones which I think have led to it. And the reason why Putin has pushed so far west beyond Kiev and dropped in paratroopers and all sorts of encircling tactics and operational procedures that you would see if you were going to take a city. And the big one was Afghanistan. That was a precursor for him pushing so far in, because irrespective of why we were in for so long, but the exit strategy was diabolical, and it was a catastrophic failure in certainly US foreign policy, but directly linked with that was NATO. Once the United States decided to pull out, NATO became untenable in Afghanistan on their own without the US air power, the purse strings and everything to sustain that operation. And it's not uncommon to keep operations in for decades until it normalizes. You can see Cyprus, you can see Germany, you can see North Korea. So to completely just walk away entirely in the manner in which he did without telling, their Afghan counterparts, it looked very, very weak on the international stage, because once you have a timeline from a withdrawal, you've already lost the initiative. Whereas if you keep it as a conditions-based drawdown, then you can do it over time. It shouldn't be the other way around. So, I think it was one of the primers or precursors for what Russia did, because he knew that NATO didn't have the resolve that it maybe it once had or perceived to have. But the conflict at the moment, so all the training that they got, not only from UK MOD operations and training missions, but that was from likes of Canada, Lithuania, Polish, Latvia, Estonia. A lot of people has been preparing or building the Ukrainian armed forces and their Ministry of Defense for several years to be self-reliant if there was any further incursion by Russia. And that's why they've kind of, don't get me wrong, they're not winning. Ukrainians aren't winning, but they're not losing. And it sounds like an oxymoron almost, but they're doing very, very well. But that comes at a great cost. And they're losing. The attrition rate for Ukrainian and Russian sides are immense. And we won't know the totality to that until thereafter. But they're doing exceptionally well from where they were in 1990 to be as robust in their tactics, I think, where I don't think Russia given I think Russia underestimated them because of that the old school doctrine and their tactics, where Ukrainians have been quick to adapt. They knew they couldn't match them tank on tank, armor on armor. So they went to small numbers, Spetsnaz units, independent units, and would do anti-armor ambushes. So you can hold back a column of 30, 40, 50 tanks by taking out the first 2 or 3, and it paralyzes them because they don't break off track, because the Russians still have got their doctrine when it comes to the armor. And the introduction of the anti-tank weapon systems has had almost a strategic impact on how well they've done for such a tactical weapon.
Just to clarify, so they have their small units. They go over, they fire a few of those, what are they, NLAWs, or is that what they're called, the NLAWs? Those
4 or 5 different types. You've got NLAWs or AT4s. You've got more or higher capability of Javelin type ones, which are wire guided and the different sighting systems on them and different ranges.
So they take out the first 2 tanks in a convoy, and that means they're essentially paralyzed for a while because they're told not to go off track. Is that right? That's
so it immobilizes them for a short space of time, so that once, let's say that anti-armor ambush takes maybe 5, 10, 15 minutes, then those guys get out of there. But by that stage, the artillery then comes in, because anybody in the tank, they might dismount and dig in their shell scrapes or their trenches if they're going to be there for any more than an hour. And then you've got the introduction, this is new type of warfare in the last kind of 10 years, is a layer of drone operations. So you've seen some of the footage where they've been using commercial off-the-shelf drones to drop grenade-sized explosive devices. Some of them are grenades. Some of them are underslung grenade launchers, 40 mil, and they just put a shuttlecock, a badminton shuttlecock.
Yeah.
They put that on the end of it, and that stabilizes it, so it's point detonation when it hits the top of the tank or in and around the dismounts. Incredibly effective and incredibly cheap. So if you've got an anti-air capability trying to take these things out, those are millions of pounds, and those bullets don't stop. So if you fire up against a drone, well, those have to land maybe, could be 10, 8, 5K kilometers away. So you have to be careful where your rounds land.
And so if the drone gets hit,
so that there is certainly having a huge impact, is the drone overlay. But crucially, to get them stopped is anti-tank ambushes, artillery, then a layer of drone.
Like the one thing that was really striking, I did hear an analysis of how the Russians are doing there, and it was to do with like logistics in terms of people were running, like some of the Russians were running out of fuel. Like they run out of fuel, like deep in enemy territory, so they're just leaving hugely expensive tanks. They were stuck, and then they run out of food, and like parts were breaking on the tanks because they were old. A lot of them are really old, and they just incapacitated them. It's really quite revealing of how well the seemingly modern, very powerful Russian army is run, it doesn't seem to be
right?
as impressive
Well,
as what
when
they'd
you
have you
think about it,
believe.
so like Russia hasn't had a full rollout on the scale in which we're seeing now. They've been similar to other nations like US and UK, where they've been working like counterinsurgency operations. So there's no real need for long, overstretched 100-kilometer convoys where you need to have a logistical framework to keep up with that and keep it sustained and keep momentum going. Because Russians have been in, they've been in Syria. They have, to a degree, been in Afghanistan recently, not just back in the 80s, but also conflicts like Chechnya and Georgia. They've learned all these lessons in counterinsurgency or small border incursions, but I don't think they applied, or maybe they forgot some of the basics of conventional type operations, where if you're punching forward, 100 kilometers into Ukraine, then you need to have a sustainable or a sustainment plan and a framework to keep it going. And one of the failures was when they drop in paratroopers 200 kilometers in, they rely on maybe 2 days worth of their own days of supply on them. And they rely on these armored columns punching in through Ukraine and not stopping to link up with them. And that's how they encircle the city. And that's normally done in the first 36, 48 hours, 72 at a stretch. And then anything beyond that, you've lost the initiative. And those two troops are, they're disconnected for the remainder of the conflict. And so when they lost that momentum at the very beginning, this is how the Russians have been kept back. And in addition to those tactics I mentioned to you earlier about anti-tank and everything else, but they really have been let down on the logistical chain. And even evidently, whether it's information, misinformation, or disinformation, you can take out some assessment where people just don't abandon tanks because they've given up. If they're there saying they've ran out of fuel, then they've ran out of fuel. And nobody stays with them. People just keep going until they run out. And it seems very lack of discipline, command and control, coordination. It seems a lack of discipline. So I don't know if they're using a lot of conscripts within those armored battalions. It doesn't seem to be their Spetsnaz or anything of their higher grade soldiers.
It's interesting because you hear about like some of Putin's top generals and spies and stuff have gone missing or are under house arrest. It's I think, oh geez, I wouldn't like to know what happened to those guys. Like,
yeah, I suppose see if the kind of strategic impact on the Kremlin is, it's better if those inside the Kremlin take out key people themselves, because I think largely, if the Russian people knew the truth or the facts, they don't support this invasion any more than I support it, or you and I. It is wrong, but if they're getting fed through a lot of the mainstream media, which is linked into the Kremlin, then it's hard for them to know otherwise. So it's not fair in the Russian people, or classing them in with this Russian aggression and invasion into Ukraine. But certainly, I can't understand how many Russian generals are being taken out. I don't know if that's because of the surgical strike capability within the Ukrainians, with really good intelligence to strike them, to take out that level of command. I haven't seen anything like that in a long time in conflicts over the last 20 years, for generals to be taken out almost on a weekly basis.
I read the reports of those. You'd wonder what that impact that has on soldiers on the ground when they hear stuff like that.
Yeah, that maintenance of morale, it's not good, because I started as a ranger, which is a private soldier, and we're working my way through 20 years to be a captain. And if somebody above you or seems that they're vulnerable, or someone's taken out, you're like, goodness, well, if it can happen to him or her, then this isn't looking good, guys. So it affects, it's a psychological aspect to it, and no soldier, no matter how well trained you are, they're all human at the end of it. And you start seeing generals being taken out, I don't know if it gives them more confidence to go against the grain and say, look, why are we doing this? Or why is my map say Russia when I've been told I've been in Ukraine by a local? So things aren't adding up. But I don't think they'd have the same level of confidence within maybe NATO member countries to challenge their chain of command, to say, look, boss, things aren't adding up here. they're very more subservient to their chain of command and wouldn't question any orders at all, because repercussions would be pretty severe for them.
Yeah, have you heard any of the phone calls? They released a bunch of phone calls of captured Russian soldiers back to their families, whether it be their wives or their mothers. And there was a kid who was like, maybe, say kid, he's like 19, but yeah, he's still a kid, like, and he'd phoned his mom, and he was eating food that the Ukrainians had given him, and it was like decent food, and they said like they weren't told about why they were going. They told it was an operation, that they weren't told it was a war and all the rest of it. It's really strange that they wouldn't say to their soldiers. Obviously there's a reason for it, but it just does. It's really strange.
Yeah, well, it's like anything, it's, if you've got an army or a force which maybe aren't all professional soldiers, a lot of conscripts, there's an element of risk in terms of information, lack of discipline. So the less they know from the Russian perspective is, then the longer they can keep operational security in terms of plans, intent, and basic things like that. And it's quite common from, especially even a lot of the Eastern European countries, which are not now NATO members, it's a mindset where information was power. So if you were a captain or a sergeant major, the more information you had and you didn't tell anyone, then everybody had to turn to you because you were the all fountain of knowledge. And especially in Russia, that's still keep that mindset. Well, the less I tell, the more power I have. Balanced with the operational security or personal security, and when it comes to information. But no, that's quite common the further east you go in Europe.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how it all plays out. Like I know from the images that I've seen, Putin, he's either sick or dying or something, because he's deathly afraid of being near anyone. He doesn't sit near anyone. You see the pictures of the big like 50-foot table, and he's in one end, and images of like his hands shaking and stuff, and he's supposedly in the bunker. No one gets to see him really. It's yeah.
But you can see in like President Zelensky is caught onto that. So every time he does, a nationwide public engagement, he counters some of that stuff. So about the microphone, the CG screen, so they are very in tune with information and countering any type of narrative, and it's very, very subtle, but very, very effective. So Zelensky almost minimizes the professional, slick videos that you would normally see him come out of the Kremlin, where there's not a foot wrong.
Yeah,
he comes straight on. He's there, like he's just taken off his body armor. He's got the brown T-shirt on. He's like, "Here's where we are." So not only does that inspire confidence within his countrymen and women who are there to help fight against the Russians, they say, well, up until that point, most presidents generally fled and left in the middle of the night, whenever the going got tough and they knew they were going to be invaded. Similarly around other countries where you really do see the substance or the kind of courage within a leader when it's really needed. And he stayed. He kept all his heads of ministry, his ministers, say, look, guys, these are here too. Get your military gear on, and we'll keep the cabinet going. They're almost on a war footing, the same way like Churchill may have done back in the day during the Second World War. He's been very effective at it.
Yeah, like he comes across extremely well, and obviously he has that background of being an actor, performer, comedian.
Yeah,
a huge amounts of charisma, and I think at times like that it pays off.
Yeah, and like when I was on the Polish border, I asked Ivan. I said, how are you finding Zelensky? How's he coming across from you? Because it's easy for us to get a snapshot in the media where that guy's a legend, and so they were a bit skeptical about his background. Was he going to hang about, or was he going to stay? Was he going to go? And so they've gained an awful lot of respect for him. He's like anything, leaders. Opinion polls go up and down, and in their politics at that time, he was actually on the way down in terms of popularity. But when this happened, he stayed, and so far so good. So they've a lot of respect for him for even just staying there and not giving up on Ukraine.
Like even his wife and his kids and all are still there, and like obviously the the Americans and maybe the British government have also said, we can get you out, like we can get you out. And he's like, no, I'll stay here. That's resolved.
Yeah, he said, I'm going nowhere. Send me anti-tank missiles, send me this, send me helmets, send me body armor. That's pretty impressive stuff. And in a way, there's things are starting to change at the moment. Like I spoke this morning on GMU about NATO troop deployments in and around the Polish border, which is significant. But also in tandem with that, the the UK's ambassador to Ukraine, Melinda, is going back in. So she's in Kiev with maybe a skeleton staff to try and at least get some sort of diplomatic ties and support back in. So at least, the Kremlin's going to say, well, hang on, we have to be very careful about bombing Kiev now. Because if you had an embassy, that has other ramifications and implications about a response.
Do you think Putin is afraid of an all-out war? Do you think he actually fears it? They talk a big game, as a lot of these dictators do, but do you think an all-out war is something he's afraid of?
I don't think he's afraid of it. I don't think he wants it. But then you're going into, what is his current mindset? What's his state of mind? Is there an illness there, or has he got to a point in his life where he wants he wants a legend, or he wants something to be remembered by? You just don't know until you get into somebody's psyche. And as you say, he keeps himself 3 or 4 people apart from even his most closest team, because he doesn't trust anyone. Whether it be a fear of poisoning, assassination. You watch most of his stuff and his international engagements. If he's offered a drink or food, he never eats it. And that goes back to his old KGB days, where even the way he walks, he's incredibly astute on tradecraft, anti-assassination attempts or that kind of counter-espionage. But his mindset, and is he afraid of World War III? I don't think he is. I hope he is very afraid of it, for everyone's sake. But his conduct and his actions to this point, and the reason for that, I just don't see how he pushed so far in. Mm-hmm. I understood the premise from a Russian perspective of doing the annexation of Crimea and which is now officially part of Russia as far as he's concerned. But then the Donetsk and Luhansk, to keep that as an operational conflict going for so long, I thought that was enough to keep, or from his point of view, to keep that buffer between NATO as a deterrent itself. Say, look, we're in Ukraine, we're fighting here. Stay away from Ukraine. But that wasn't enough for him. He went in for a full-scale invasion to take the city centre and all of those outlying cities. I don't know why he's done that. He had nothing to gain. He had no geopolitical capital to gain. He had nothing militarily to gain. I don't comprehend why he's done it. I know the narratives that he's pushing out about some sort of a Nazi regime and this and that. So I know what disinformation he's feeding to his population.
The Nazi regime with the Jewish leader.
Yeah. I understand that's just his narrative, and I know he doesn't believe that, but it was a pretense for him to push further in. But then on the other side, I mentioned about NATO. NATO's got no mandate to directly intervene as an entity, as NATO in its entirety. But that doesn't stop individual countries having a bilateral arrangement or an agreement with Ukraine. And that's exactly how a lot of EU countries, EU members, NATO members have actually been able to finance or supply weapon systems into Ukraine via a different method. But NATO itself have increased their troop dispositions in Finland, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland, and they are really big numbers. UK alone is increasing that to 8,000. Compare that with 1,000 troop exercise deployments in Estonia previously, up until 6 weeks ago. These are big numbers. So there is a shadow military game. I hate calling it a game because it's not a game. Yeah. It's serious, but in terms of that kind of chess pieces, they are NATO's pre-positioning, almost as if we're expecting Russia to go further beyond Ukraine and maybe interfere with Finland or indeed the Polish border. Because bear in mind, there has been Russian strikes 15 miles from the Polish border in Lviv, which is the humanitarian coordination point, but also onward distribution point for military material coming in from Poland. So it's a precarious situation.
And isn't Finland joining NATO, or they're making their intentions that that's the idea?
They've expressed an intent. in order for them to do that, there's a process there. It would really.
Do you think it's helpful at this stage or no?
Not really. I don't think it would be helpful. I think it would actually help Russian or Putin's narrative. They say, look, NATO are encroaching on our borders.
Aye.
But then how do you take away someone's independent choice to make a decision as a sovereign nation?
Because they obviously feel threatened.
Now, but NATO can say no, can defer that decision for a period of time. But Finland wants the same assurances which Poland get, which is if there's any incursion inside Poland physically, then that would trigger Article 5 within the NATO agreement, which means that one is attacked, then all are under attack, and then all would respond, which would be, it's World War III when you think of it.
Yeah, it's scary. I think there was somebody shared on Twitter. It was like a video on Russian national television talking about bombing bombing the UK, and Belfast had a nice bomb and a nice mushroom cloud over it. So I was like, oh, great, that's reassuring.
I took a bit of risk and went on the Nolan show live a couple of weeks back, and I was on along with Edwin Poots because we had two different positions on the actions required by the UK government in response to what was happening. And Nolan had all that type of graphics where there was a nuclear detonation within Belfast. And I know what he was doing to kind of give people a geographical comparison of what these things do. But then again, I thought it was maybe too much on the media to say, well, the fact there's a Russian conflict or an invasion in Ukraine, now we're showing things of a nuclear mushroom cloud in around Belfast. I didn't think that was a good way of kind of communicating that with people, where I took a position that, you can support Ukraine in very different ways, which will help them strategically, operationally, and tactically, but not getting NATO directly engaged in conflict with Russia. So you're going up to a point, you're doing as much as you can, but not incurring any more risk outside of Ukraine, because where Putin's had a position where, no, there must be a no-fly zone right now, NATO must enforce it. I thought, well, do you seriously understand the ramification of what you're saying? That means you really are going to add fuel to a fire which has exploded. So yeah, it might sound great. It might sound, yeah, let's be decisive, let's do this. But I've been on the ground, I've been in conflict, and I've seen, that loss of life, the wounded in action, the killed in action, and the bodies that come home on both sides. And there's no real winners in conflict. It's just, it means there's been a political failure somewhere. So I really took issue with him jumping straight into let's go into World War III. Helps nobody. Doesn't help Ukraine, doesn't help Europe, doesn't help Russians.
Naomi Long, she came out in favor of that as well. Actually, I remember her saying that. I suppose with your experience, great. You know better.
Great. I mean, it sounds great. It's an enforced no-fly zone. Okay, how do you do it? Which countries are going to, what jets, which air forces are going to take on that? Does that mean our jets need to go inside Ukrainian airspace, which is contested with Russians? And then what's the mandate to do that? Are you doing that as a bilateral direct support in terms of military intervention supporting Ukrainians? Then who makes a decision for that? UK government. But this notion of enforcing a no-fly zone in Ukraine is absolutely nonsense without getting directly involved in against Russians on the ground, in the air. It's the exact same thing.
It's hard to see where the off ramp will be for it. How do they de-escalate, and what does that look like? And then what's the aftermath? Great, everyone stops fighting, but the country's wrecked.
I know. And so well, firstly, how does it draw down? And irrespective of how long it takes or what military actions or de-escalation takes place, it's quite likely that Russia will not give up what they've taken in Donetsk and Luhansk. They're trying to use the whole Donbass region, which is about a third of Ukraine. I think that'll still be fiercely contested. But strategically, Russia want to connect a land between Crimea, along Mariupol, across into Donetsk, Luhansk, Mykolaiv, Mariupol, that kind of southern edge, which would connect directly, to Russia, to Crimea, and have a land connection with it, that that will be one of their strategic objectives at the end of this. So if they held on to that, that would be considered a win for them in terms of militarily.
Ukraine's enormous. I was looking at a map. I didn't realize it was that
Yeah.
big. And I didn't realize we had so much stuff that comes from Ukraine. Like how much wheat and fertilizer they produce is bananas.
It's huge. Like I remember we started off, if we were going to the likes of Odessa, Mykolaiv, we would always drive, but it would take us a day just to drive, and then we'd have to overnight and prep and then execute our meetings the next day, sleep, then drive. So it was like a 3-4 day window just for a day's worth of activity.
Yeah.
So we started looking at other options. Then we found these really old school kind of Soviet trains, overnighters, brilliant. So we just had to work out how we do it safely, securely, to make sure we're not caught sleeping. And brilliant. So leave Kiev train station that night, sleep all the way down, wake up in the morning, quick wash, shave, straight in the meeting. And the amount of time we saved, and by doing that, we could get to more places during our time there. As opposed to looking for hire cars, and some of the roads weren't great. If you went north south, the roads were diabolical. East west, they were brilliant, big carriageways and everything. But when you drive through, if you drive south to Odessa, there's so many, just it's almost like you see Superman, the Kansas in America, these just agriculture, combine harvesters, just so much agri all the way down. It's vast. It's hard to comprehend when you're driving for so long. You're still in the same place. But when you get there, see, like Odessa, huge industrialized port. That is really busy and really good nightlife as well. So it attracts a lot of visitors. Fascinating place. One of the Ukrainian logistical hubs militarily as well. And so drove pretty much in northeast, southwest, more west, and I didn't go too far east. We had a lot of restrictions on how far we could push east because we didn't have a mandate to get directly involved in augmentation or mentoring on the front line. It was all kind of second, third lines of training support in the safe zones.
Jeez, you've a crazy job, or you had a crazy job. You're about to, fingers crossed for you. Hopefully, go into another crazy job, in Stormont. But your job's like, it's amazing that the things that you do and places you go and the people you meet and stuff.
Yeah, like I've been around the world, some really interesting places, and not just the conflict zones, but other areas. So that kind of highlights was always the Afghanistan piece, Helmand, Kandahar, Kabul, then in Ukraine for a period of time, briefly in Iraq and around Baghdad, Basra on the Kuwaiti border, but also things like different types of warfare. I studied and went on Arctic warfare for a period of time in Norway, which is horrendous. Didn't really like that one. Too cold and wet for me.
Yeah.
Then conversely, over in the Americas, Central America, we do jungle warfare training in Belize on the Guatemalan border. That was really, really fascinating, really interesting. And then just everywhere in between, you get to end up in some random places with some fascinating people. And hopefully that's the type of thing where I've been trying to push on politics to keep it at a human level.
Yeah.
So any experiences I have of communication, we always said, like, guys that joined the military that were just into a new operation, yes, you were armed, you had all this firepower, but that was maybe only 10% of the job. If you were doing that, then you had no other choice. But you have a brain and you have ears and you have a mouth. Use them in that ratio. So, conflict management, resolution, basic negotiation, things like that. So you could actually understand something before it goes wrong, which meant learning about the language, learning about specific cultures and how certain religions conduct themselves in certain days, whether like it's Eid now, so it's Eid Mubarak, in terms of the Arab or the Islamic world.
Yeah.
So once you understand these things, and you can say that that's no longer suspicious, because just because you see somebody at a stream at 5 o'clock in the morning doing something where it only looks suspicious because you're ignorant to the fact of what they're doing.
Yeah.
Once you put it in context, you go, it's first light, it's before the first prayer. That person is about 500 meters away from a mosque. He's washing himself, and that's the tradition and how they would do. So this is where, a lot of things were done wrong, and this led to a lot of civilian casualties, throughout the history in the Middle East of those deployments, because lack of understanding, and that is where counterinsurgency went really wrong at times.
Um,
You know,
I hope this isn't a rude question, Ryan, and please feel free to. I'll even cut out the question so you don't even have to have the podcast as being like that. You said no to the question. Have you like in terms of have you experienced sort of conflict, and have you had to, you know,
so put it this way, Damien. I was directly involved in direct conflict, and it was mainly in
and forgive my
Afghanistan.
ignorance, Ryan,
So
if
it's
you've
okay.
talked very
So
publicly about this.
I've been getting
I'm
better
getting a
at it
bit dizzy at the minute with this election cycle and the amount of
as time goes
podcasts
on.
we've done.
So my first deployment into Afghanistan was where I was kind of first in contact with the Taliban, the enemy, and this is direct, close quarter engagements. So that's gun battles on a regular basis. And my first job in Afghanistan was to coordinate close air support. So that's where I would coordinate airstrikes from drone platforms, anything which flew or had a capability or a munition on it. That became my assets. And I would have airspace and I would work in accordance with the ground commander's intent. Generally, it was most of the rules of engagement we used was self-defense, and that's a very, very strict rules of engagement, and that's largely I would prosecute danger close targets. So that was my first real experience of that type of conflict. Fast forward, I returned there in.
Can I ask a quick question about that? Is that all right? Before you go on, so
Sure.
drone strikes. Have you coordinated things where unfortunately like civilian casualties have resulted, and if so, what is that like for you as a person? Never mind, like you've got a job
Mhm.
that you are, as you say, defending yourself, so there's no ill intent there.
Sure. So, fortunately, we never had to employ a drone or airstrikes when there's civilians nearby.
Right.
So, if there were civilians nearby, then you just didn't do it because it
Right.
was wrong, because you would use an alternative means. That meant you would maybe employ a sniper, or if that means you put your head down for 10 minutes and take the bullets coming in, then
Mm-hmm.
you do so. I was very fortunate on a lot of the missions and airstrikes I did were very clean cut, they were all intelligence led, and sometimes it would take weeks to build up a targeting pack on certain individuals and groups of individuals, which were always armed or had a cache of certain type of material, and so it's very strict. You can't just say, right, I'm going to call an airstrike. Here's a grid
Mm-hmm.
coordinate, drop it, and that's the same whether it's a drone platform or an F-16 with a pilot inside. The that process is very, very strict, and you have to do a battle damage estimate. You have to do a collateral damage estimate, and you have to go through 10 pieces of critical information, even just to be in a position where, right, we're now going to make a decision. Do we go ahead with it or do we not? So it's all very much on risk versus reward analysis. And whenever it came to my collateral damage estimate, whenever there was a factor of civilian, then that ruled out any of going to the next step of using an airstrike. So fortunately, I've never been in a position where I've incurred civilian casualties. I have been in close encounters where we've had similar or close to blue on blue, which is very easily done. When you talk about things flying in the air at 200 knots, 300 knots at 15 to 20,000 feet, and when you're trying to look at a target which is 0.3 of a meter squared, when you talk about surgical strikes, yeah, so it's
Wait,
not
sorry.
something.
When you say blue on blue, do you mean accidentally hitting your own people? Is that what you mean? Is that what blue
Yes,
on
yeah,
blue
so
means? Yeah.
happened a number of times on that deployment I was on. Frankly, or thankfully, not with my assets with me, but I was in a battle space where I was leaving, and so I left on the back of a Chinook helicopter and got taken to a new location. But the person who was replacing me was on that Chinook, so we had to do a hot handover under fire in an engagement. And it was only whenever I had left that I had heard that there was an issue of a blue on blue where they called in an attack helicopter, which is an Apache, which fired 30 millimeter rounds, which are huge and have explosive tips, very damaging. And that actually hit a couple of Afghan soldiers and a few friends of mine who were British soldiers at the time. Fortunately, none of them were killed, but they took severe shrapnel from that engagement. But then I found out afterwards that my friend who he said to me that he thought I was still on the ground, and he couldn't wait to get my hands on me to give me, he was angry with me. He thought it was me, but not
right,
that
right.
not that removes the seriousness of it. But he goes, McCready, I'm going to kill you, because dark humor and everything else. Everybody survived. Yes, we took a bit of shrapnel, but it's a lesson learned. And all those are very serious, and they go through a lot of lessons learned. You can have that kind of your certification removed, suspended until the investigation is complete. At that stage, I was flown elsewhere in the country to do other support missions with other assets.
And in terms of your experiences, have you been left any lasting trauma, for want of a better word, with you? Anything that kind of sticks with you that you kind of is a bit hard to shake off?
I have a few pieces of shrapnel stuck in my body still, Damien. So I went to from that one we just spoke about, we fast forward to another one, which was in 2010 and 2011. I got wounded in action from it was either an underslung grenade, so it's a grenade which is fired from a rifle, because you can get more distance between you and them. And it landed between me and a couple of my teammates, and I took shrapnel in the face here.
Okay.
So I went straight in my cheek. Then I got another bit on my neck on number C3.
Oh yeah.
C3, not pretty close. I've got another one stuck in the back of my arm, just at the joint of your arm and back. So I got that on it was the 27th of October 2010.
You must be a nightmare getting through the airports. It must be pinging away.
Not too bad. Depends where you are in the world. Some airports are better scanners than other, but it's the one on my face got taken out a day later. The other two they couldn't take out. So that's the kind of physical reminders I have, I suppose, from that day. And there was other people injured that day. And during the course of that deployment, we had, unfortunately, guys that were killed in action, and who just didn't make it home to their families. So it's more so I actually have more lasting trauma mentally trying to rationalize that than I do my physical injuries, because I can understand the physical transactions in war. It is what it is. But everything thereafter is a lot more difficult. And so that's one of the reasons where a lot of my spare time, I would work with veteran support groups, set up a veterans hub here in the Northwest, which gives them a purpose, gives them a place to talk about these things, not just linked with Afghanistan or any other conflict, but in general, to tackle the mental health issues linked with PTSD specifically, or just life in general. And that's a huge motivator of mine now, to give something back to veterans.
Do you think you have PTSD as a result of that,
No,
or any other time?
No, like I don't have a diagnosis of PTSD. I went through. I tried to look after myself, and I done a psychiatric screening. And the reason why I'd done that was not because I felt I had so many red flags that I had to kind of hand myself in. It was, to that point, I had a lot of friends of mine that kept committing suicide. I just couldn't get my head around it. I was like, these are guys which were top soldiers, exceptionally fit, exceptionally driven, but never really showed any signs to their closest friends and committed suicide.
Yeah.
I couldn't understand it, and it really bugged me. And I thought, goodness, well, if that can happen to them, what happens in 5 years' time where I don't see the same things that we could have seen in them? So I owed it to my family and my friends to go and get checked out and just go through the same way I would do if I thought I had a broken leg. Then go to A&E, get an X-ray. Well, if you think things aren't right in the head, then do exactly the same thing. There's no taboo. There's no issues. Go and have that kind of X-ray with a psychiatrist or a mental health nurse or a practitioner to say, so you can actually manage it and not let it get to a point where you feel that you've got no other option or choice to take your own life. And so by doing that, I thought I could maybe try and lead by example, because it's not easy to kind of go down that route and say, let's get checked out. So yeah, I've got no diagnosis of PTSD. Yes, I've got other issues of stress levels, which I manage, whether it be, so I have a system of white, yellow, orange, red, black in terms of my personal situation of where I am and the risks that I take and the threats that I perceive. So I never go anywhere and let my guard down anywhere at any time.
Do you mean you've had physical threats placed against you?
No, nothing specifically.
Are you
but
talking is this like a color code for your mental health? Is this,
Yeah.
sorry. Oh, right.
No,
Sorry.
kind of both. You hit on one in terms of personal security and being aware of people who are out there that would have a go at you. But I don't have anything specifically right now. But just if I get in a position where I shouldn't be here, why am I taking unnecessary risk? Why am I doing that? So I just have a bit more risk averse because I have a family, I'm in society. Then I shouldn't get to a point where I feel threatened and I can't do anything about it.
What do your family make of you running and the campaign and people's reactions, and how are they coping with it all?
Good.
And enjoying it or whatever.
Yeah, well, generally we're not really a political family, that we're all in it together, we're all in the branch. So my wife's very much her own person, very independent, the way she thinks, what she does. So I asked her endorsement at the beginning. I said, look, we're a team, because it's a big commitment to take on a campaign or stay in politics. So I would only do it with her support. Not that makes it any easier, the last 6 months of not being at home, but we've been through things before where I've been away for 3, 4 months, 6 months, 9 months. And, that's very difficult for her to keep a job, to manage the children. And it's harder. I always said it's easier for me being deployed in operations. It's easier for me to be out there than it is for her to stay at home and actually do much more than what I'm doing. And the same way in politics, I know she's got a harder job than I do. So when I come in, I may have had a hard time on the press or a hard time on the doors. Then that shouldn't affect things in the family. She's just as an equally hard task of doing school runs, going to work, coming back, trying to prepare dinners and manage everyday life, which is equally as hard. So she's got she's given me that full support, and I'm very grateful that I have it, because I couldn't have done it, if she hadn't supported me. But as the days have went on and the weeks have went on, she's got more and more kind of supportive. She's like, right, let's do this, let's go and do it. Where she was almost indifferent to the point of, well, whatever politics was or is, as long as you do well, great. But now she's got an appetite for it, I think.
Happy
She's seen the campaign maybe, and maybe she's had people speak to her and work and go, oh, I really like what Ryan's doing, or maybe not. It's she feels now bought in politically as well.
Maybe she sees all those middle-aged housewives thirsting after you in the tuxedo on that video. I saw some of the comments online. I'm like, oh, okay.
I try not to jump into the comments too much or read too much into it. For me, it was pretty basic. I won't bore you with political campaign stuff, but it's as basic as being a people person, being straight and just being authentic. And then I have my 3-line whip of encourage is about young people, inspiring is about our kind of work, our adult population, those in work, and then reassuring was just about our elderly generation. And it's applicable to everything in politics. It doesn't matter whether it could be education, economy, or underachievement within people within my city, or underinvestments economically within my city. Then I thought I had to go to business leaders, inspire them, or inspire confidence in them to say, I want to, bring the confidence to the Northwest so we can create good jobs, good wage, and everything else. So yeah, I won't go any further into politics stuff, but you can kind of see where it comes across from my experiences and application of like determination and how we think, plan, and strategize on effects. So where you could have a tactical effect in Ukraine right now, which is to block or defend or deter or neutralize. My effects in politics is to encourage, inspire, and reassure. Fantastic. I just apply the same rigor behind it. And I've got some fascinating and great people who support me. Fifi's doing comms. I've got Darren, who's the kind of political election agent, and I've got so many activists which are helping me along the way. That's my team.
I think maybe not a lot of people would know your comms person, Fifi, who's very lovely to deal with, by the way. Is obviously she's a Catholic, and it's maybe not something lots of people are aware of, but it's just a kind of probably a nod from yourself to just, or it's an endorsement. It's an example that you're for everyone.
Yeah. So it's easy it would have been easier for me just to say the words and say, well, I want to be the politician for everyone. Words are absolutely meaningless without action. And so it was circumstantial. I didn't go out and try and recruit Catholics, Muslims, Protestants. I have a vision. If you like it, I ask no further questions, that all that you subscribe to being in the UUP, if you're a member, or if you like the way we're doing business. And yeah, it so happens that I've got people in the party now which have got different religions, and I have been demonstrating action to reach out. And I've been inside BT48, I've been in Gallia, I've been in the Cregan, and all these community centres, and I've been welcomed just as much that I've been welcomed in more common areas like New Buildings, Tully Alley, in BT47. And not only has that worked for me, it's actually bringing back a message. When I speak with people on the streets, even this evening in Tully Alley, they're like, oh, them. I said, well, hang on. I said, do you know the same issues you're having right now, that, your community centre's not open to 10 o'clock, so you're on the streets, and you're getting bored, and you're taking down posters, you might be throwing stones. I said, they've got the same frustrations as you and the same aspirations in life. They're not your enemy. They've been let down just as much as you, or they've been let down just as much by their politicians as you have by yours in the past. You have more in common than you do in difference. And the sooner you figure that out, and the younger you figure that out, the better your life will be. It's that simple.
That's a very strong statement, Ryan. I'm just thinking in my head, I'm definitely going to use that in the trailer for the podcast. Ryan, it's been absolutely brilliant talking to you. Like, I know we kind of got a bit bogged down with like the military talk. I was thinking, geez, this poor guy probably wants to talk about his campaign, but it was really interesting what you were talking about. So
for me, there's nothing off the table. I'm at your disposal when I agree to do these things, and there's no, excuse the pun, there's no awkward conversation, I suppose.
I will hear that's it. Like, the good thing is these podcasts aren't about doing like a party, political, whatever. It's just to kind of for people to get a feel for you. And we've had some really good feedback, which is really nice. Even most recently with Colm Eastwood's. Colm's got a good sense of humor. It's a kind of drier sense of humor, but he's a good sense of humor, and that really came across. And I think people were really impressed with obviously your energy, enthusiasm, organization, and just your ethics. So it has been really awesome talking to you. I've 5 questions that I ask at the end of every podcast. So
quick fire, or can I think about them?
Oh no, quick fire has to be. Well,
okay.
Some of them might require a wee bit of thinking, because sometimes you ask them like, oh, I don't know.
Okay.
So first one, voting rights for 16-year-olds, yay or nay?
I'd be inclined to give them voting rights. That's where I'm going.
Cool.
So not a clear position yet, but yeah, I think more power to them.
Yep, cool. So suppose they work a job, pay taxes, they get the vote. That's cool. Favorite film?
James Bond.
Okay.
And it's always the newest one that comes out. Yeah.
So you think Daniel Craig's maybe best Bond?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Your tuxedo at the ball with that had very James Bond vibes.
Yeah.
That did look. I'll be honest with you, it did look deliberate. That was
yeah. Oh well, don't hate the player, you hate the game. But I went all out in that one.
Hey, fair play. No, fair play. Favorite artist, musician, song, whatever.
Probably AC/DC. I'd say, yeah.
Nice. Any particular songs, or do you know what? See, when people ask me the name of a song, I can't.
I know. Thunderstruck.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Good song. Favorite thing you're watching on Netflix? Maybe not right now because you're incredibly busy, but before the chaos of electioneering.
Do you know what? It's the Big Bang Theory.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's on Netflix. So that's only kind of, if I ever get a chance that I want to detach, unwind, or just get away from it all, a half episode of that and I'm asleep.
It's easy, isn't it? Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Favorite place to travel on the island, Ireland, north or south, or Northern Ireland or Republic, whatever you call it?
Trying to think whether to give you an exact spot or not, but it'll be along the coast. Well, it's the north coast, further down towards, so between here and Portrush. I can't give you the exact one, but a few secret surf spots down there, you see. So it's definitely at the sea.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's on a surfboard. That's
Very
north
good.
coast all the way, every day.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
very good. And finally, favorite place to travel abroad?
That I've already been to.
Yep.
Guatemala.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep, I've actually been there as well. Whereabouts?
Yeah. I was on the. That's a good question. You know where the Mayan temples, Mayan ruins are?
Yeah, Tikal. They're actually they're kind of, there's quite a few different sites, I think, but the one I went to was Tikal.
Yeah, so I started on the Belize border and then worked my way through into Guatemala. So I didn't really get any tourist spots or anything. It was more rural kind of. I just wanted to go see proper Guatemala and get on one of those Mayan ruins and and go horseback riding and pretend to hold up, the head rolling down and stuff.
Yeah.
So I didn't really get any touristy spots there, but Guatemala. And for most of it, I had a few mezcal tequilas and wasn't always sober, so I don't know really where I was most of the time.
I know, it's hilarious. Yeah, and I was soaking up the culture. It's like, awesome. Yeah, that's a great answer. My sister-in-law's from Guatemala, so I think she'll appreciate that. Well, the last part is the really cringy part. So I'll say thanks very much for coming on the podcast. And the cringy part is that we have to smile at the camera like idiots while I take a screenshot. So then that'll be our tweet to say coming soon. So